In the summer of 1588, a fleet of more than 130 ships sailed from Spain under the banner of Catholicism and imperial might. The Spanish Armada, a symbol of Philip II's ambition and divine conviction, was meant to crush Protestant England, depose Queen Elizabeth I, and return the island nation to the Catholic fold. In our timeline, the Armada was scattered by English fire ships in a brutal Atlantic storm. But what if that storm had never come? What if the Spanish had won? In that alternate reality, the entire course of history veers down a new path, one shaped by the cross, not the crown, by Madrid, not London. Imagine the English coast trembling beneath the boots of Spanish infantry. The once proud Royal Navy lies wrecked or surrendered. Queen Elizabeth is overthrown, captured, or executed. London is plunged into chaos, its Protestant elite fleeing or capitulating. In their place rise Spanish-backed Catholic nobles, loyal to King Philip II. Cathedrals are rededicated. Protestant churches shuttered. The English Reformation is violently reversed. Catholicism becomes the law once again, enforced not through gentle persuasion but through fire, exile, and the sword. With England subdued, Spain tightens its grip on northern Europe. The Dutch revolt, so long supported by English gold and arms, loses its last hope. The Protestant Netherlands crumble beneath Spanish might. Amsterdam never rises as a mercantile hub. The Dutch Golden Age, with its painters, scientists, and philosophers, never dawns. Instead, the Spanish Empire stretches unchallenged from the Atlantic to the Baltic. Catholicism dominates the continent, not only by faith, but by force. The balance of power tilts heavily toward the Habsburgs, and the dream of Protestant liberty is extinguished before it ever truly blooms. Meanwhile, France teeters on the edge of its own religious civil war. In our world, the Protestant Henry of Navarre eventually becomes King Henry IV, bringing peace and stability. But without an independent England or a Protestant Dutch Republic, his path is blocked. The Catholic League, now emboldened by Spain's triumph, installs a more obedient, papal-aligned ruler. France remains a staunchly Catholic monarchy under the long shadow of Madrid. The religious tolerance Henry promoted never materializes. The Edict of Nantes is never signed. Huguenots are driven underground, imprisoned, or massacred. Across the Atlantic, the age of exploration shifts dramatically. Without an ascendant England, the early seeds of the British Empire never take root. There is no Jamestown in 1607, no Pilgrims in 1620. The eastern seaboard of North America falls under the sway of Spain and perhaps France. The English language never embeds itself in the New World. The cultural DNA of future North America is formed not by Protestant settlers with English common law, but by Catholic missionaries and conquistadors. What we call the United States might never exist. Or if it does, it emerges centuries later, with different boundaries, languages, and ideologies. No American revolution is sparked by Enlightenment ideals filtered through British political thought. No Declaration of Independence, no Constitution. Instead, the colonies remain under firm Iberian control, governed not by assemblies of elected landowners, but by viceroys and inquisitors. The fusion of liberty and property that so defined early America is replaced by royal decrees and ecclesiastical authority. The British Empire never becomes a global superpower. There is no naval dominance, no colonization of India or Australia. The map of the world, usually colored red in 19th century atlases, looks very different. Canada becomes French or Spanish. South Africa stays under Dutch or Portuguese influence. The Caribbean remains firmly in Spanish hands. Trade routes favor Madrid and Lisbon, not London. The Industrial Revolution, largely nurtured in England's climate of legal stability and scientific inquiry, is delayed or diverted. English itself becomes a regional language, spoken on an isolated island with little global influence. Instead, Spanish dominates the global stage. It becomes the language of trade, diplomacy, and science. The lingua franca of the future world is not the tongue of Shakespeare and Newton, but of Cervantes and Loyola. This linguistic shift shapes not only how the world communicates, but how it thinks. Entire fields of literature, law, and political theory take different trajectories. At home, the cultural and intellectual life of England is stifled under Spanish rule. The King James Bible is never commissioned. William Shakespeare may still write, but his plays are censored or banned. Works like Hamlet, Macbeth, and King Lear, steeped in existential doubt and political ambiguity, may never see the light of day. English drama, poetry, and philosophy are muted beneath the weight of religious orthodoxy. The Elizabethan Renaissance, so vital to English identity, dies before it ever flourishes. Without a Protestant England, the Enlightenment lacks one of its most powerful engines. Thinkers like John Locke, Francis Bacon, and Thomas Hobbes are silenced or never rise. The philosophies that inspire constitutional democracy, secular governance, and human rights develop more slowly, if at all. In a world ruled by Catholic absolutism, skepticism is heresy. Science is suspect. Innovation is dangerous. The questioning mind, rather than being celebrated, is persecuted. As the 18th century unfolds, revolutions erupt across Europe, but differently. In France, there may still be an explosion of resentment against privilege and monarchy. But without the ideological framework offered by English political thought, it turns more violent, less structured. The American Revolution never provides a blueprint. The concept of a republic based on inalienable rights and checks and balances remains a fringe fantasy. Monarchs fall, but so do hopes for stable, representative governance. The age of revolution is born into chaos, not clarity. The Industrial Revolution, delayed by the suppression of English capitalism and Dutch ingenuity, may finally take root elsewhere, perhaps in Prussia or parts of Italy. But it arrives with more difficulty, more resistance. Factories emerge not in Manchester or Birmingham, but in Naples or Vienna. The engine of modernity chugs forward, but slowly, unevenly. Europe remains stratified and agrarian for longer. Mass education, urbanization, and technological innovation lag behind. And so the 19th century is shaped not by the British Empire's global reach, but by a slower, more conservative tide. Spain continues to dominate the Americas, though its grasp may weaken over time. Independence movements still arise, but without the English-speaking world's liberal philosophies to guide them, they unfold more violently, less cohesively. Latin America becomes a patchwork of fragile states, constantly threatened by internal coups and external intervention. In the absence of a powerful British Navy, global maritime power falls into different hands. Perhaps France takes the mantle. Perhaps Russia or the Ottoman Empire rise to fill the vacuum. The geopolitical balance shifts. The scramble for Africa is led by Catholic empires. Asia becomes a battleground between Portugal, France, and Spain, not Britain. The cultural and economic forces that defined the 19th century take on an unfamiliar shape. By the 20th century, the consequences are profound. There is no British resistance to German aggression in World War I. No Winston Churchill to rally the free world in World War II. A Spain-aligned England may be neutral, irrelevant, or even complicit. The balance of the war tilts toward the Central Powers, or perhaps a different conflict entirely ignites. The beaches of Normandy are not stormed by Allied forces based in Britain. The European theater lacks its Western Front. The war ends differently, possibly without Allied victory at all. The Cold War, too, plays out on different terms. Without a strong Anglo-American alliance, the ideological contest between capitalism and communism lacks coherence. Spain, perhaps still authoritarian or theocratic, becomes a leading Western power by default. NATO is a looser, more fragile coalition. The European Union, if it forms at all, is built on Catholic social values rather than secular liberalism. The world feels more rigid, more religious, more hierarchical. Even our modern digital age looks different. Without the scientific revolutions launched in Protestant England and its American successor, the development of technology is slowed. There is no Silicon Valley, no British computing pioneers like Alan Turing. The internet arrives later. It is developed in France or Spain or Japan. Its architecture is different. Its language is different. Its freedoms, particularly of speech, privacy, and decentralization, are not guaranteed. Today, in this alternate world, the cultural centers are Madrid, Mexico City, and Buenos Aires, not London, New York, or Sydney. Global cinema, music, and literature reflect a Spanish-speaking world. International diplomacy, scientific publications, and even aviation protocols are conducted in Spanish. The Anglican Church never forms. The global Christian community remains dominated by Catholic doctrine. Ideas of separation of church and state, religious pluralism, and secular governance are less widespread. In short, the modern world is shaped not by British exploration, Protestant individualism, or Enlightenment rationalism, but by the enduring reach of the Spanish Empire and the Catholic Church. The legacy of that one fateful summer in 1588 ripples through centuries, reshaping everything from politics to language, science to culture, war to peace. The winds of the English Channel, which once scattered the Armada and preserved a Protestant future, now blow in reverse. History sails under a different flag. One stormy sea. One decisive battle. One altered outcome. That is all it would have taken to change the world.